Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and U.S. President Joe Biden tomorrow have their first one-on-one meeting, a virtual summit, virtual bilateral, Biden's first with a foreign leader. They're expected to speak for about an hour about the close economic ties between Canada and the United States. Those ties are seeing some strain in Biden's first month in office, including his cancellation of the Keystone XL pipeline and his Buy U.S. policy that threatens to freeze out Canadian businesses from lucrative U.S. government contracts. A source tells CBC News that Trudeau is also expected to raise China's detention of Canadians Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor in that meeting tomorrow. Of course, we'll have full coverage of that summit here on the program tomorrow. By the time the two leaders speak tomorrow, the U.S. will likely have recorded more than 500,000 deaths from COVID-19. There's the number right now. Johns Hopkins University has a tracker that shows 498,901 deaths, more than double the number in Brazil, the nation with the second most lives lost. Experts say the actual number of U.S. deaths is higher than this because of the testing shortfall in the first weeks of the pandemic. Our senior Washington editor, Lindsay Duncombe, is here this morning. Joe Biden, the U.S. president, Lindsay, has made pandemic response the cornerstone of his first days in the White House. How will he be marking that expected 500,000 death milestone today?
There's going to be a solemn sunset ceremony at the White House with President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris. It is expected there will be a candle lighting, a moment of silence, and then Joe Biden will deliver remarks, words of mourning and grief and looking forward. It's just really hard to get your head around the number 500,000. We're also expecting the bells at the National Cathedral here in Washington to ring out 500 times to mark that number of deaths. It is, according to the reports this morning, being compared to a similar death toll when you take the world wars, both of them, as well as the war in Vietnam, and combine them all together. Certainly, it is a huge amount of grief for the country. And if you think back to March, when there were warnings about what the pandemic could look like in the United States, just under a year ago, at that time, officials were saying it could be as bad as 240,000 deaths. Well, the reality is more than double that. Here is how Anthony Fauci characterizes the pandemic in the United States.
It is historic. We haven't seen anything even close to this for well over 100 years, since the 1918 pandemic of influenza. It's something that is stunning when you look at the numbers, almost unbelievable, but it's true. This is a devastating pandemic.
Roughly 1/3 of the deaths in the United States have taken place in or to people who were in long-term care facilities. And the overwhelmingly disproportionate effect of the pandemic has had an effect on communities of color.
Lindsay, we have seen the U.S. healthcare system now pushed to the brink at least twice in this pandemic, especially in hotspots like California, New York, the Sun Belt states. What's the situation like nationally there now?
Improving steadily, and vaccinations, the season coming off of the restrictions just after Christmas are all part of the reason for that. You know, vaccinations are happening at well over 1 million a day in this country. The most recent vaccination numbers are about 1.5 million. That's down. 1.7 million a day was the highest. That is because of the delays and cancellations caused by the winter storms in the United States last week, but it is expected to return to the pre-storm levels this week. In California, the governor of that state, Gavin Newsom, says he sees a bright light at the end of the tunnel.
We still have some challenges, March, April, with scarcity of vaccine, but we move into May, June, and July, we're at a completely different place.
A different place that many here in the U.S. will come closer and closer to resembling normal, but it will be a normal that is colored, Heather, by so much grief and so much loss.
Lindsay, thank you. Yes, we'll have coverage of everything to come in Washington today as Joe Biden marks that milestone. Thank you, Lindsay Duncombe, our senior Washington editor.